Hey, what's up everybody? So today, once again, I'm going to do things a little different. I want to go through some of my background and my history, and also, as the title says, go through things that I call happy disasters. First, when I first got into fish keeping, I started in freshwater. I did some videos about it, posted on YouTube, and they're cringe-worthy at best. But after a while of being in freshwater, it was just not challenging enough. My tank was on pretty much autopilot, and therefore it didn't really keep my interest. So I started looking at the possibility of going into a saltwater tank. Now, when I first started researching it, my idea was I was going to go into a fowler tank. Had no idea for coral, didn't want to. Well, I was reading all the things, how tough it was, and how expensive it was. So my first tank I was going to have in saltwater was going to be a fowler tank. That started me on a year-long process. The first 6 months of this big idea I had about going into a saltwater tank was spent just reading everything I could, looking at every video I could, and searching the internet on topics that dealt with salt water. About 4 months into this process, I decided that, okay, I'm going in all the way and I'm going to go for coral. So again, this took me more research and deciding what corals I'm going to get, what I need as far as equipment, how I can do this the best way I can, because after all, being married and having a kid limits my funds. So it was going to be a lot of DIY, and also the equipment that naturally you're going to have to purchase. So I would say up to about 5.5, 6 months before I even made a purchase of any equipment, I was just doing research. Then the very first thing I got, I remember it like it was yesterday. I went on bulk reef supply and bought a RODI unit. So this started me stockpiling equipment and getting ready for my first tank. Luckily, my first tank my brother had, it was a Tenacor 50-gallon tank. Now that Tenacor was an all-in-one. It had an overflow and all the filter components built into the back, but I didn't want that. So this led to researching on how to restore acrylic and how to work with acrylic. Some of the videos I do have on my channel show that tank. I cut out the entire back filter of this tank and built my own overflow. I used a Herbie overflow for it and built my own sump out of a 10-gallon tank. Which soon, before I even, mind you, the 10-gallon tank, the sump was built, before I even put water in the tank, I changed it to a 20-gallon breeder. So then again, more research comes down the line. Finally, I started putting water in the tank. I filled the tank and started stocking it. There were successes and failures along the way, but you're always learning and researching in this hobby. There's always new stuff and new technology that comes along that is at least a little, if it interests you, you research it and find out what it's about. Excuse me. Now, what I would say as far as a major important thing for me was researching it. Before you even make a purchase in this hobby, research it, make sure it's something that you want to do, and make sure that you're ready for everything that goes along with it. The expense of things that may not last. Corals die, fish that you buy may also die, and this is all expense that you're tacking onto it. Once you make that commitment, then research how to do everything. What things you can do as far as DIY, my stand, the sump that I have, all were DIY. My overflows, what have you, even some reactors I've done in the past that were DIY. But what that leads to is the happy disasters, I call them. Now, very first happy disaster that I can recall was, again, with the Tenacore, after I reconditioned it, and it looked like an ice cube sitting on top of my stand. I come around the back of the tank and I noticed these little scratches in the seams. Well, now this starts another whole research project, and I come to find out it's called crazing. Older acrylic tanks will form these little microscopic cracks or what have you, and it's totally natural, and it led me to realize that this tank was only going to be my starter tank. It wasn't going to be something that I was going to be in for the long haul. Plus it was 50 gallons, so the size alone, I knew I wanted to go bigger. I built my stand so I could accommodate a bigger tank, and that basically led to the next thing is when I put water in this tank, the front bowed out on me. Now it didn't bow out bad, and another research project comes down where I find out that this is another natural thing about acrylic tanks is that they will bow a little bit. So that's not so much a happy disaster. The happy disaster comes when we get ready to move. I'm about 3 years into the hobby at this point, and I go to just do some regular maintenance on it, and I hear the worst sound in the world for an acrylic tank owner. That's the sound of a crack. I look, and up by the overflow where my bulkhead was, a crack had formed. No water was leaking out of it, and I also had weld on, so I hit it with the weld on right away, and it didn't leak on me. But this tank was only going to be up about, you know, a couple of weeks longer, so I was just mindful and stressing out about everything going on with this tank at that point. Now I go on the forums and I put a question out if anybody's got any 90-gallon tanks, because this is, you know, that's the next size that I wanted to go into. Of course I want to go big, big, big and bigger, but 90 gallons seemed like the best size to go up to. I get a comment from one of the members of the New Jersey Reef Club that they have a 90-gallon tank and they're willing to sell it for $75. At that same time, I go to my LFS and I meet a woman who has a 90-gallon tank. She has the whole tank and cabinet. She doesn't want it anymore because she thought she was going to go up into the 90-gallon, but doesn't want to take on the responsibility of going up into this tank. She gives me the tank and the hood for nothing. Just free. Just come up and pick it up, she says. Well, bargain. Now I pick up a tank. This is a great thing. This is the happy part of that disaster. This leads me to the next happy disaster. I go to move this 90-gallon tank. I pick it up. I bring it home. I'm getting ready to stage for the move, and I drop the tank and break the two side panels and the front panel. Well, I thought I was going to jump out of my skin at that point. Here I am, I got this 90-gallon tank I always wanted, and now it's laying broken in a million pieces. I looked at a local glass shop, and it was going to cost me over $200 to get that fixed, which I wasn't going to do. I went back to the Reef forum, to the post where the 75-gallon tank was. It had already been purchased, the $75 tank. It had already been purchased by a member, and I post again that the 90-gallon I got for nothing is broken apart, and I'm still looking for the 90-gallon. Well, the person who bought this 90-gallon tank that was on the forums contacts me and says that he really doesn't want the tank, that, again, he had purchased it to hopefully go into it, but he didn't want it, and if I give him the 75, that I could have it. Turns out he lives, now I was moving from the place I was living at, approximately an hour away. He lives maybe 15 minutes from where I'm living now. This is the happy part of it. I pick up this tank, and now this is what you see. I have my tank all set up, and I have a 90-gallon tank I want. Happy disasters come and go. Okay? At the time, they're the worst thing in the world. You don't know whether you can continue in the hobby. You don't know how you're going to get by it. You've got all these things that can happen. And believe me, there have been reefers that have experienced a lot more disasters than me that were worse. But this is where you got to just say to yourself, one, if you love the hobby, that this is just a setback, that you'll work your way out of it, and that you, before you know it, that'll lead you to something happier. So I guess the biggest thing now is my happy disasters that I'm worried about are basically keeping coral and fish alive. Tank structure and integrity is another thing that I worry about. The tank that I purchased, this tank it's an older tank. It's been resealed, but everything seems to be okay. I mean, you're always in the back of your mind worry about if you're out for 4 hours and you come home, you're worried about you're going to come home to water on the floor and a lot of things that are dead. But that being said, my biggest thing is that enjoy the hobby and realize there are going to be tests for you that come sometimes one on top of the other, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months apart. But if you're committed to it, realize that disaster will go away and it will be replaced by a happier one. So that pretty much wraps it up for me and my background. I'm going to have more videos coming up shortly. I really appreciate the response from the first two videos since I started reposting again. I want to send out a thank you to CJ Aquariums and all the people that have subbed to me. Scott and Mile High Reefers has given me feedback. CJ's been excellent. You'll see me most of the time on his live streams. And that's about it. So I'll just give you one more close-up of the tank. And wish you happy reefing.